I'm Brother Chidananda. I'm a monk of Self-Realization Fellowship and disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. I've been a monk in SRF for about 26 years, and for many of those years, most of those years, my service in Self-Realization Fellowship has been with our publications area, assisting with the editing and publication of the books by Paramahansa Yogananda. Here is this individual who is the focal point of Western history, and yet a huge block of time in the life of this individual, there's absolute silence in the Gospels about that. We have the beautiful story of his birth and the visit of the three wise men, and then a little account of him with his parents visiting the temple in Jerusalem. Takes him up to about the time when he was 12, 13, just a young man. And then there's a curtain of silence that just comes down, boom, and nothing. Nothing for 18 years. We have the story in the Gospel shortly after the birth of Jesus where the Gospel describes the visit of the wise men of the East who came to honor the birth of the Christ, the birth of Jesus, with gold and frankincense and myrrh. And again, the Gospel is very sketchy about who these individuals were and where they came from. You know, traditionally now we call them the three kings. You know, we three kings of Orient are. Well, there's no mention in the Bible of them being kings. There's no mention of where they came from. There's just this word that magi, meaning wise men from the East. Now, Paramahansa Yogananda said that actually those three wise men were great sages, great rishis who had traveled from India. From the very beginning of Jesus' birth, we have this very significant connection with the spiritual traditions of India. Again, the spiritual homeland, the spiritual lighthouse of humanity of ancient times. Paramahansa Yogananda said that Jesus himself, when he got to be about 12 or 13 years old, joined up with one of the common trade caravans that were constantly going back and forth from Palestine and traveled to India, where he spent many years both in India and also in Nepal and Tibet, responding, you might say, to that connection that was established between him and these great sages of India at the time of his birth. In the accounts that Notovich found in the Tibetan monastery and translated, where it describes Jesus' travels and what he did while he was in India, there's one specific location that they talk about, and that is this ancient Hindu temple called Jagannath Temple. The head of this Jagannath Temple traditionally is one of the four ecclesiastical heads of Orthodox Hinduism. Just as in the Catholic Church we have the Pope, in Hinduism, in the Hindu tradition, there are four spiritual heads that are called Shankaracharya. For hundreds of years, literally centuries, the rest of it was forgotten because they did such a good job of destroying and declaring heretical and actually burning or otherwise suppressing any other competing versions of what the teaching of Jesus and the life of Jesus was really signifying. As the Gospel says, and Paramahansa Yogananda concurs with this, that then he spent a number of days talking and teaching his disciples further, at the end of which time he essentially dematerialized his body, which in the Christian tradition is described as the ascension into heaven. Did Jesus really die at the crucifixion, and was he bodily resurrected? In the last section, the last chapter of the Second Coming of Christ, Paramahansa Yogananda goes into this in great detail, and it was his perception, it was his assertion based on his own intuitive understanding of what Jesus had gone through. He said that absolutely he experienced physical death. It wasn't just going into a coma and that then they revived him and then he was able to then walk and talk and meet with his disciples later on. He said no, he died. After his resurrection, he was living in this highly spiritualized state, and in fact his body was materializing and dematerializing all the time during that point. And we have evidence of that in the stories where the disciples are there having a meal together in a room and all of a sudden there's Jesus in the midst of them. He didn't come in the door. The Gospel doesn't tell us how he got there, but clearly he just materialized in their presence. Or another one is they saw him just walking through a wall. Continuously, from the end of the first century until today, there are Christian communities, they call them the Thomas Christians, who date their church or their teaching back to St. Thomas. Even the simple statement of Jesus, behold, the kingdom of God is within you. This is pure yoga. When they asked him, well, where is this kingdom going to come? Will it be a political or a social, or will it be at this location or that location? And he immediately corrected them and said, no, the kingdom of God is within you. And that is what we experience in meditation. What is that single eye? If your eye be single. This is one of the very fundamental tenets or experiences of yoga, of India spirituality, and that's the third eye, the spiritual eye, the eye of intuition and divine perception, which is located here at the point between the eyebrows. And through meditation, one awakens or activates the spiritual perception of that single eye, of that spiritual eye, and perceives the nature of reality, the nature of creation as divine light, that all of this seemingly material, physical world is really vibratory light emerging out of the divine creative principle, and that's what one perceives with that awakened eye, spiritual perception.